There is a truth most good people never want to face, a truth that sits quietly in the shadows of human behavior. Good people assume others are like them. They believe kindness is understood, loyalty is reciprocated, empathy is shared, and sincerity is valued. But the dark truth is this: not everyone operates from the same level of consciousness. Some people interpret your goodness not as strength, but as an opportunity. They see your patience as permission. They see your compassion as weakness. They see your understanding as a doorway to exploit. Good people often carry a light so bright that they forget the world contains darkness too. And because they do not harbor harmful intentions, they cannot imagine the hidden motives of those who do. They assume honesty is the universal language, when for many, manipulation is far more fluent. They assume love is freely given, when for some, love is merely a mask worn to achieve what they want. The dark truth is that being good does not protect you from harm. In fact, your goodness can attract the very people who feed on it, people who admire the light but do not want to create their own, people who need validation they never earned, people who cling to your emotional warmth because they cannot generate any within themselves. But your goodness is not the problem. Your boundaries are. Good people often confuse being good with being available, being forgiving, being endlessly understanding. They exhaust themselves proving their loyalty to people who never deserved access to their inner world. The moment you stop allowing your empathy to be weaponized against you, everything changes. When you learn to see behavior, not words, intentions, not apologies, patterns, not promises, you reclaim your power. You stop trying to heal those who benefit from staying broken. You stop explaining yourself to those committed to misunderstanding you. You stop showing loyalty to people who would abandon you the moment you stop serving their needs. The truth is simple. You do not need to become less good. You need to become more aware. You need to understand that your light is precious, and not everyone deserves to stand in it. You need to protect your energy with the same intensity you give your love. Because once a good person awakens, once they learn to guard their heart, their time, their spirit, they become unstoppable. Their goodness stops being a vulnerability and becomes a force no darkness can manipulate. This awakening is not the loss of innocence, it is the birth of wisdom. Not everyone thinks like you do, and this is one of the hardest truths for good-hearted people to accept. When your intentions are pure, when your actions come from sincerity, honesty, and compassion, you naturally expect others to operate from the same emotional foundation. You assume that loyalty means something to everyone, that love carries the same weight for every heart, and that kindness will be recognized and reciprocated simply because it is genuine. But the world does not work that way. People come from different levels of awareness, different wounds, different motives, and different inner landscapes. Some people see life through the lens of empathy, while others see it through the lens of self-interest. Some communicate to connect, while others communicate to advantage themselves. Some give because they feel fulfilled by it, and others take because they feel entitled to it. When you assume that everyone thinks like you, you create a silent expectation that sets you up for disappointment and betrayal. You might believe someone's promises because you would never break your own. You might trust their affection because you would never fake yours. You might forgive repeatedly because you assume they value the relationship the way you do. In reality, there are people who speak in half-truths, who hide their intentions behind charm, who use vulnerability strategically rather than authentically. These individuals understand your goodness better than you understand their intentions. They can read your empathy, your hope, and your desire to see the best in them, and they shape their behavior to fit the version of themselves they want you to believe. This is why some people disappoint you so effortlessly. It's not because you misread the world, but because you read it as a reflection of yourself. You expect emotional honesty from those who have mastered emotional manipulation. You extend trust to those who have not earned it. You offer your heart to people who only know how to take from it. And when they show you who they truly are, it feels shocking, unfair, and deeply personal, but it is not a reflection of your worth. It is a reflection of their inner landscape, one that may be filled with insecurity, selfishness, unresolved trauma, or a lack of moral development. To understand that not everyone thinks like you is to free yourself from the illusions that cause unnecessary pain. It doesn't mean you stop being a good person. It means you stop assuming goodness is universal. It means you start observing people without projecting your own values onto their actions. It means you start recognizing patterns instead of clinging to potential. It means you learn that someone can smile at you and still envy you, compliment you and still resent you, stay close to you and still intend to use you. When you finally grasp this truth, you begin to interact with the world more wisely. You learn to hear the subtle messages in people's behavior. You learn to protect your energy without becoming cold. You learn to offer kindness without offering access. You learn to trust slowly, observe deeply, and love without abandoning yourself. And this understanding doesn't harden your heart, it strengthens it. It teaches you that your goodness is rare, but it is not naive. It becomes a gift you offer thoughtfully, not blindly, and a light you carry with awareness, not vulnerability. Kindness without boundaries invites exploitation because, in a world where not everyone operates with integrity, unlimited access to your heart becomes an invitation to those who seek to take more than they ever intend to give. When you are naturally compassionate, forgiving, and considerate, it's easy to assume that kindness will inspire kindness in return. But this assumption ignores a difficult reality. Some people do not see kindness as a virtue, they see it as an opportunity. They interpret your patience as permission to repeat harmful behavior. They interpret your forgiveness as a guarantee that there will be no consequences. They interpret your willingness to understand them as a lack of strength, and your empathy as something they can use to their advantage. When you extend kindness without limits, you unintentionally teach others how to treat you. If someone realizes they can disrespect you and still be welcomed back, they learn that your heart is accessible at their convenience. If they notice that you always bend so things don't break, they start expecting you to bend even further. Your kindness becomes a resource they consume instead of a quality they appreciate. And the more you give without boundaries, the more you attract those who are comfortable taking without gratitude. It doesn't happen all at once. It begins with small allowances, small excuses, small sacrifices. But over time the imbalance grows, and suddenly you find yourself depleted, confused, and wondering how someone you cared for became the source of your exhaustion. People who lack empathy are especially drawn to those who give freely. To them, kindness is not a connection point, it is leverage. They understand that you will stay longer, try harder, and forgive deeper than most. They know you are willing to explain instead of accuse, to listen instead of defend, to try one more time instead of walking away. And because they sense this, they push limits, test tolerance, and expand the boundaries you haven't set. They rely on your fear of hurting them, disappointing them, or appearing unkind. They count on your gentle nature to shield them from accountability. Your kindness becomes a shield for their behavior, and your silence becomes a safe place for their harmful patterns to continue. True kindness is not the absence of boundaries, it is shaped by them. Without boundaries, kindness becomes self-sacrifice. It turns into emotional labor you never agreed to, responsibilities you never asked for, and burdens that were never meant to be yours. Boundaries do not make you harsh or closed off, they make your kindness intentional. They ensure that your compassion remains pure instead of exploited. They filter out those who only take and hold space for those who genuinely care. Boundaries protect not just your emotional well-being, but the integrity of your character. When you understand that your heart is precious, you begin to guard it with clarity. You learn to say no without guilt, to step back without apology, and to stop giving to those who only show up with empty hands. Because kindness without boundaries is a doorway to exploitation, but kindness with boundaries becomes a force of strength, one that uplifts you instead of draining you, and one that draws people who value your presence rather than those who feed on it. The mask others wear reveals less than their patterns, because anyone can present a polished version of themselves for a short time. Words are easy to arrange, emotions are easy to imitate, and intentions are easy to disguise when someone seeks admiration, validation, or personal gain. People wear masks not only to project an image, but to hide the parts of themselves they don't want you to see, the insecurities, the motives, the fears, the wounds, and sometimes the manipulative strategies that lie just beneath their surface. A mask can look convincing. It can mimic empathy, mimic loyalty, mimic love, and mimic sincerity, but a mask has an expiration date. Patterns do not. Patterns expose the truth that performances try to conceal. While words can paint illusions, behavior reveals consistency. A person may tell you they care, but if their actions repeatedly contradict their promises, the pattern speaks louder than the performance. They may present themselves as gentle or attentive in the beginning, only to slip into indifference or entitlement once they believe they have secured your trust. The shift is never sudden. It happens through subtle behaviors, small changes in tone, small lapses in respect, small withdrawals of effort. These patterns are the fingerprints of their real nature, and once you learn to see them, you can no longer be fooled by the mask. People often reveal themselves in the way they handle your vulnerability, your boundaries, and your silence. Someone who respects you will remain consistent even when you're not convenient to them. Someone who values you will remain present even when the relationship requires effort, but someone who only values what you provide will begin to fade the moment you stop giving them what they want. Their mask may tell you they care unconditionally, but the pattern of their behavior will show that their affection was conditional from the very beginning. This is why you must study patterns, not isolated moments. Anyone can be kind when they need something. Anyone can be patient when they're being watched. Anyone can be honest when the truth benefits them. But look at how they behave when no reward is attached, when accountability is present, when discomfort arises. Pay attention to how they react when you say no, when you set a boundary, when you express a need, or when you stop prioritizing them above yourself. The pattern of their responses in these moments reveals more truth than their most beautiful mask ever could. When you begin to trust patterns over appearances, you protect yourself from emotional illusions. It becomes harder for people to manipulate you with charm, harder to sway you with sweet words, and harder to deceive you with temporary displays of effort. You no longer get attached to the version of someone they want you to see. Instead, you connect with who they consistently show themselves to be. Understanding this truth doesn't make you colder, it makes you wiser. It allows you to give your trust to those who have earned it through steady actions, not borrowed it through a temporary performance. It teaches you that the real character of a person is not revealed in the facade they present, but in the patterns they cannot hide. You cannot heal someone who benefits from being broken, and this is one of the most painful lessons a compassionate person ever learns. When you care deeply, your instinct is to pour warmth into the cold places of others. You want to comfort, to guide, to uplift. You want to show them that love can rewrite their story and that tenderness can soften even the hardest edges. But not everyone wants to be healed. Not everyone is seeking growth, peace, or change. Some people cling to their brokenness because it gives them something they do not want to lose: control, excuses, attention, or the ability to avoid responsibility. Their wounds become a shield, their pain becomes a tool, their dysfunction becomes a way to shape the world around them without having to confront themselves. When someone benefits from staying broken, they do not want solutions, they want saviors. They want someone who will tolerate their chaos so they don't have to organize their own life. They want someone who will absorb their emotional storms so they don't have to face their inner weather. They want someone who will blame circumstances so they don't have to acknowledge patterns. Your empathy becomes their comfort zone. Your forgiveness becomes their safety net. Your desire to heal becomes the very reason they never heal at all. You begin to notice this when every attempt to help them turns into another cycle of frustration. You provide support, they resist change. You give advice, they ignore it. You set boundaries, they push against them. You forgive, they repeat the same behavior. Their apologies are full of emotion but empty of action. Their promises sound sincere, but their actions reveal indifference to their own growth. They do not want to confront their wounds, because confronting them would mean losing the power those wounds give them, power over your emotions, your time, your energy, and sometimes even your identity. Good people often fall into the trap of believing they can love someone into wholeness. They believe patience is a remedy, understanding is a cure, and sacrifice is a form of healing. But you cannot pour stability into someone who thrives on instability. You cannot create peace for someone who finds comfort in chaos. You cannot give clarity to someone who prefers confusion because it keeps them unaccountable. Healing requires willingness, self-awareness, and responsibility, and no matter how much you care, you cannot supply those for someone who refuses to develop them. The truth is, you become exhausted not because you are giving too much, but because they are giving nothing. They are taking what they need to maintain their broken identity, your time, your empathy, your emotional labor, while offering no effort toward genuine transformation. And the longer you try to fix what they refuse to address, the more drained, diminished, and disconnected you become from yourself. The moment you accept that you cannot heal someone who does not want healing, you reclaim your power. You stop carrying their burdens as if they are your own. You stop confusing suffering with loyalty. You stop mistaking their dependency for love. And in that moment you finally understand that real healing begins with you, choosing yourself, reclaiming your energy, and walking away from battles that were never yours to fight. Your awakening begins the moment you recognize how many pieces of yourself you have silenced, softened, or surrendered, just to make other people comfortable. For far too long you may have played small to avoid conflict, to keep relationships from falling apart, or to prevent others from feeling threatened by your strength. You learned to dim your personality, mute your truth, and compress your spirit because somewhere along the way you were taught that keeping the peace was more important than keeping yourself whole. You learned to apologize for things that weren't wrong, to take blame for situations you didn't cause, and to carry emotional weight that never belonged to you, and each time you did, a part of you disappeared a little more. But what you may not have realized is that this shrinking wasn't seen as kindness by the people around you. It was seen as compliance. When you silence your needs, people stop considering them. When you hide your strength, people forget you have any. When you stay quiet to avoid tension, people assume you're okay with whatever they impose on you. And slowly the world begins defining you by the smaller version you've presented, not the powerful one you truly are. Awakening begins when you understand that peace built on your silence is not peace at all. It is a quiet form of self-abandonment. It is the slow erosion of identity, purpose, and authenticity. The more you try to be easy, the more you lose touch with your deepest truth. And eventually, you reach a point where the pain of staying small becomes heavier than the fear of being seen. This is when awakening starts, not in a dramatic moment, but in a quiet realization: I cannot keep sacrificing myself to maintain harmony that isn't real. You begin noticing how often you agree when you don't want to, how often you stay when you should walk away, how often you say it's fine when your heart knows it isn't. You begin recognizing how many connections depend on your silence rather than mutual respect. And for the first time you start choosing honesty over comfort. Awakening is not about becoming louder or harsher. It's about becoming true. It's about giving your voice the same value you've given everyone else's. It's about letting your boundaries speak even when your words feel shaky. It's about allowing the real you to exist without editing yourself to fit someone else's expectations. And when that happens, the dynamics of your life begin to shift. Some people will resist your awakening because your silence served them. They benefited from the version of you that tolerated their behavior. They admired your patience because it allowed them to avoid accountability. They praised your kindness because it meant you didn't challenge them. And when you grow, they may call you difficult, selfish, or changed. But this is simply the noise that rises when you stop dimming yourself to protect someone else's comfort. The more you embrace your truth, the clearer your relationships become. The people who value you will rise with you. The ones who only valued your compliance will fall away. And the peace that replaces them will not be the fragile peace you once protected. It will be a peace rooted in authenticity, clarity, and self-respect. Your awakening begins the moment you decide that your voice deserves to exist. The moment you choose honesty over appeasement. The moment you stop shrinking and start standing. And once that happens, you never become small again. Kindness is one of the most beautiful qualities a person can possess, but when it lacks structure, it becomes a doorway through which the wrong people walk with ease. Many individuals assume that being endlessly forgiving, endlessly patient, and endlessly accommodating is a sign of strength. They believe that if they just give more, love harder, and tolerate longer, the other person will eventually recognize their efforts and reciprocate. But kindness without boundaries does not create gratitude. It creates entitlement. It teaches people that they can take from you without giving back. It teaches them that your yes is automatic, your forgiveness is guaranteed, and your comfort will always be available, even when they provide none in return. People who lack empathy often see kindness as a resource to be used, not a gift to be respected. They do not interpret your softness as compassion, they interpret it as access. When you offer more than you should, they learn that you will bend. When you ignore their disrespect, they learn that you will tolerate. When you prioritize their needs over your own, they learn that your well-being is negotiable. And once a person learns that your boundaries are absent, they stop seeing you as a human being with emotions. They see you as a function, something that exists to make their life easier, smoother, more comfortable. Kindness was never meant to be unconditional access. Kindness is meant to be discerning, directed, and intentional. Without boundaries, it becomes self-sacrifice disguised as generosity. You begin to pour into people who do not value you, stay in situations that drain you, and offer emotional support to those who would never do the same for you. This kind of kindness slowly erodes your spirit, making you question your worth and your expectations. You begin to believe that giving endlessly is the only way to keep relationships alive. But real relationships do not require your exhaustion. They require mutual effort, mutual respect, and mutual care. Boundaries are not walls, they are filters. They do not shut people out, they decide who gets to stay. They protect your emotional space from those who mistake your kindness for weakness. They teach others that your compassion is not a resource to be exploited, but a gift to be honored. When you finally establish boundaries, you don't become less kind, you become wise. You learn to give to those who appreciate you, not those who deplete you. You learn to say no without guilt, to step back without explanation, and to choose yourself without apology. And in doing so, your kindness becomes stronger, purer, and more meaningful, because it is no longer rooted in fear or obligation, it is rooted in self-respect. People reveal very little through their smiles, their compliments, or their carefully crafted personas. Words are the easiest things to create and the easiest things to manipulate. A mask can be charming, polished, attentive, even loving. It can be shaped to mirror your desires, your hopes, your vulnerabilities. Some individuals become experts at appearing genuine, speaking beautifully, and presenting themselves as everything you've been waiting for. But the mask is not where truth lives. Patterns are. Consistency is the language of authenticity. Repetition is the fingerprint of a person's real character. Someone may say they care, but do they show up when you need them? Someone may promise change, but do their actions shift, or do they repeat the same cycle? Someone may express love, but do they protect your heart, or do they harm it through negligence and excuses? People can disguise their intentions for a while, but their patterns will always betray them. Patterns show how they treat boundaries, how they respond to conflict, how they speak when they're angry, how they act when they're not trying to impress anyone. Patterns expose the truth behind the mask. The reason so many people get hurt is not because the signs weren't there, but because the mask was strong enough to distract them. When you want to believe in someone's potential, you ignore their repetition. You focus on what they could be rather than what they consistently are. You cling to their apologies instead of acknowledging the cycle they keep recreating. You hope their words are a preview of their future, even when their actions are a mirror of their past. Learning to trust patterns over promises is one of the greatest forms of emotional maturity. It requires you to detach from illusions and align yourself with reality. It teaches you to see beyond charm and look for consistency, effort, responsibility, and integrity. It teaches you that someone who values you will not leave you confused. They will not offer affection one day and indifference the next. They will not make excuses for behaviors they refuse to change. They will not rely on the mask to maintain your connection. They will rely on their character. When you stop being impressed by performances, you begin to choose people who show up with truth, not theatrics. And the moment you prioritize what people do over what they say, you protect yourself from deception, disappointment, and emotional chaos. The mask may be convincing, but patterns never lie. Some people do not want healing, they want sympathy. They want attention, reassurance, and emotional resources without ever doing the inner work required to transform themselves. They cling to their wounds because these wounds give them identity, leverage, or control. To heal means they would have to take responsibility, confront their patterns, and change their behavior, and for many, that is far more frightening than remaining broken. Healing requires accountability. Staying broken requires nothing but staying the same. Good-hearted people often step into relationships believing they can fix someone with enough love, patience, or understanding. They think that if they just invest more time, offer more compassion, or forgive more freely, the other person will finally evolve. But you cannot heal someone who chooses dysfunction. You cannot force growth on someone who benefits from staying small. When a person uses their pain as an excuse to mistreat others, avoid responsibility, or manipulate sympathy, they are not seeking healing, they are seeking advantage. Brokenness becomes a tool. It becomes a shield against accountability and a magnet for rescuers. They know that as long as they present themselves as hurt, confused, or misunderstood, someone will step in to save them. And good people fall for this, believing they are helping when in reality, they are enabling. Every time you fix their mess, they learn they don't have to. Every time you forgive their outburst, they learn their behavior has no consequences. Every time you take responsibility for their emotional world, they learn they never have to examine their own. You cannot want healing more than they do. You cannot become the substitute for their self-awareness. You cannot carry someone who refuses to walk. Healing is a choice. And if a person does not choose it, nothing you do can transform them. All you do is drain your own energy, deplete your own spirit, and compromise your own growth for someone who has no intention of growing. The harsh truth is this: some people improve only when their dysfunction stops benefiting them. Some change only when they lose access to the people who kept rescuing them. Some grow only when the comfort of brokenness is replaced by the discomfort of consequences. Your role is not to heal them. It is to recognize when your empathy is being misused, when your support is being taken for granted, and when your love is being weaponized to keep someone exactly where they are. Walking away is sometimes the greatest gift you can offer, because it forces them to face the reality they've avoided, and it saves you from sacrificing your life to mend someone who was never interested in becoming whole. Many people spend years reducing themselves, softening their truths, dimming their talents, quieting their voice and suppressing their needs, just to avoid upsetting others. They fear conflict, disappointment, or abandonment, so they shrink to fit into spaces too small for their spirit. They walk on emotional eggshells, trying to maintain harmony even when that harmony is built on their own silence. This form of self-abandonment becomes so familiar that they confuse it with kindness, humility, or maturity. But shrinking yourself is not peace, it is self-erasure. Your awakening begins the moment you realize that love does not require you to disappear. Healthy relationships do not demand silence, they encourage expression. They do not punish your truth, they welcome it. They do not ask you to dilute who you are, they hold space for your fullness. When you stop making yourself small to keep the peace, you begin to understand how many of your connections were held together by your willingness to tolerate discomfort, disrespect, or emotional imbalance. There are people who prefer you small because your authenticity threatens their insecurity. They want you quiet because your voice exposes their flaws. They want you compliant because your strength disrupts their control. As long as you shrink, the relationship feels stable. But that stability is an illusion built on your suppression. When you finally begin to expand, to speak, to stand, to reclaim your worth, these individuals often react with resistance or hostility. Not because you're wrong, but because your awakening disrupts the dynamic they depended on. Your awakening is not loud or dramatic. It is subtle. It begins with a refusal to apologize for things that are not your fault. It begins with saying no without guilt. It begins with telling the truth even when your voice trembles. It begins with honoring your emotions, your needs, your boundaries. It begins with allowing yourself to be seen, not edited. Piece by piece, you reclaim the parts of yourself you abandoned to keep others comfortable, and with this awakening comes an uncomfortable but liberating reality. Not everyone will stay. Some people were only connected to the version of you who was quiet, convenient, and easy to control. When you stop shrinking, they lose access to that version. But those who are meant to be in your life will not fear your expansion. They will grow with you, support you, and celebrate your emergence. Your awakening is a return to yourself. It is the moment you choose truth over approval, growth over comfort, authenticity over acceptance. And when you stop shrinking to keep the peace, peace finally becomes something you feel within, not something you perform for others. Goodness on its own is a beautiful trait, but without awareness, it becomes fragile, easily manipulated, easily drained, easily misdirected. Many good-hearted people go through life believing that their compassion alone protects them, that their sincerity will be understood, that their gentle nature will inspire others to behave with the same level of integrity. But when goodness is unguarded, it becomes a magnet for those who seek to take advantage of it. Awareness is what transforms goodness from vulnerability into strength. Awareness teaches you to see beyond words and into intentions. It helps you notice who respects your boundaries and who pushes them. It reveals who values your presence and who merely uses it. Awareness sharpens your understanding of human behavior, allowing you to differentiate between those who genuinely appreciate your kindness and those who approach it as an opportunity to fulfill their own needs. When goodness is paired with awareness, you no longer confuse manipulation with affection or inconsistency with passion. You stop giving people more chances than their behavior deserves. You stop believing that love can fix what accountability should. You stop attaching yourself to potential fantasies and idealizations. Instead, you operate from clarity. You recognize patterns early. You enforce boundaries naturally. You retreat gracefully from anyone who disturbs your emotional equilibrium. Awareness does not make you cynical. It makes you conscious. It teaches you that goodness should not require your self-sacrifice. It teaches you that you can be kind without being available to everyone. It teaches you that compassion does not mean allowing others to drain you. It teaches you that your heart is not a resource to be consumed, but a sacred space to be protected. Once you combine awareness with goodness, your presence becomes powerful. You no longer chase love. You attract it. You no longer tolerate disrespect. You distance yourself from it. You no longer get stuck in cycles of trying to prove your worth. You embody it effortlessly. People feel your strength not because you are hardened, but because you are aware. Your goodness gains direction, intention, and boundaries. It becomes something people respect rather than exploit. The most powerful people are not the cold ones. They are the warm ones who know when to close the door. They are the kind ones who refuse to be deceived. They are the compassionate ones who can walk away when necessary. Their goodness does not come from naivety. It comes from wisdom, and that wisdom makes their heart unshakable. Goodness becomes power when you see clearly, when you choose consciously, and when you give intentionally. It becomes a force that uplifts you rather than breaks you. It becomes something that lights the world without dimming you in the process. So in the end, your journey is not about becoming harder, colder, or less compassionate. It is about becoming wiser with the goodness you carry. It is about recognizing the value of your energy and protecting it with the same care you offer to others so effortlessly. You are not here to save people who refuse to rise, nor to explain yourself to minds committed to misunderstanding you. You are here to grow into the fullest version of yourself. One who can see through masks, one who understands patterns, one who refuses to heal people who benefit from staying broken, and one who no longer shrinks simply to make others comfortable. There comes a moment in every awakened person's life when they finally realize that their light was never meant to be dimmed for the sake of anyone's comfort. Your kindness was never meant to be surrendered to those who only wanted to use it. Your empathy was never meant to be manipulated by those who avoided their own reflection. And your soul was never meant to be drained by people who had no intention of pouring anything back into you. The truth is, you were never too sensitive, too emotional, too forgiving, or too hopeful. You were simply surrounded by people who didn't know what to do with someone who feels deeply and lives sincerely. The real transformation begins the moment you choose yourself, not out of selfishness, but out of self-respect. The moment you decide that peace is more valuable than pleasing, that boundaries are more powerful than words, and that awareness is the shield that protects the best parts of you. When a good person finally awakens, the world changes around them. Manipulators lose their influence. Negative people fall away. Chaos no longer seduces you. Patterns become clear. And the truth becomes your compass. You stop seeking validation and start trusting your intuition. You stop fighting for love and start aligning with it. You stop carrying others and begin carrying yourself with strength, clarity, and purpose. This is the turning point, the moment where goodness stops being a vulnerability and becomes a force that no deception can manipulate, no darkness can drain, and no broken soul can use for its own benefit. This is where you step into your true power. This is where your light stops flickering and begins to shine with intention. This is the beginning of your sovereignty, your clarity, and your inner liberation. And from this point forward, you do not walk into the world hoping to be understood. You walk into the world fully understanding yourself.